All right, welcome everybody to episode number 4 of the Sparks podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Nick Ross, and I'm really excited to introduce today's guest, whose work has had an impact on me in many ways. Edwin Rutsch is the founder and director for the Building a Culture of Empathy movement and is based out of Santa Barbara, California. And we have a really great conversation focusing around a practice that he calls the empathy circle. And it's a really simple, easy, and effective way to develop the skills of active listening and empathy, as well as has a long list of other benefits. Now, you'll hear Edwin mention empathy as a way of being, and this can lead to becoming more open, authentic, caring, trusting, grounded, as well as being able to see and relate to the humanity in other people. I think it's pretty clear how polarized our society has become, and that's a big reason why this work is so important right now. Often in conversations, we can have a tendency to give advice or to try and convince others of our opinion. Or maybe we struggle to listen because we're just focusing on what we want to say once the person has finished talking. And this practice is like going to the gym, but for relational skills. So partway through our talk, we actually model the process so you can get an idea of how it works. I also highly recommend checking out some of the links that I'll post in the description, some of which are referenced in our conversation, to learn more and see some more examples. If you're intrigued and would like to participate or get involved, again, check out some of the links and please reach out, send me a message, and we'll discuss how you can do that. So thank you for watching and listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks so much, Edwin, for agreeing to be to speak with me today. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for your interest. You were saying that you saw our empathy circle with John Vervaeke, I think, on what does reason feel like. So glad to follow up on that or any other topic around empathy and so forth.
Yeah, no, that was the video. I thought it was great. And then I started following your work, and then I got more into following all your videos, and you have a lot posted, so it's been a while going through those, and I've just been fascinated with just the empathy circles and empathy in general, and what you have to share and say. And so I don't know if you want to do a brief introduction of yourself, or I can kind of
sure, I can go in. I'm Edwin Rutsch. I'm director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy. So I've been working about 15 years on this topic of empathy. Was sort of a seeker, growing up, did a lot of traveling around the world, got into high tech, and then started making some documentaries about human values, maybe 14 years ago, and then came across the value of empathy and thought, oh, this is really important. This is sort of what I was seeking, that method, that way of connecting with people and life and humanity. And it was sort of what I'd learned also in all the travels. So I've thrown myself into it to see how do we really just raise the level of empathy in society. So and then the latest thing that happened is my brother bought this Catholic seminary in Santa Barbara that's behind me and asked me to manage it. So we're going to build the Empathy Center here. I'm in the process. We're setting things up, cleaning things, starting to do workshops and stuff.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I know you said you did a lot of traveling. And I think one of your mottos was learning by participating?
Participating and doing. Yeah, I got bored with, high school, just learning sort of rote, just in classes, really wanted to get out there and learn by putting myself in different situations. So graduated in 3 years and just took off traveling, kind of traveled and worked my way around the world for years.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. Just reading your bio was a lot of fun, actually. I went onto your website. Is it Best Empathy Training, or that's just
there's
for the
a lot of
circle?
Websites for different projects. The kind of core website is cultureofempathy.com.
Right.
So then you have the Empathy Tent, which is a project where we take a tent out and offer listening at a street level. Have been to a lot of conflicts, political left-right conflicts where demonstrations we set up and try to listen to both sides and mediate. We have the Empathy Circle, which is just a practice that I found is just a really good first step, sort of gateway practice to empathy skills and mindset. And then we have a training, the bestempathytraining.com, which is for how to learn to facilitate those empathy circles.
Awesome. So yeah, you gave us some great jumping off points there. So I figured maybe we could start with the empathy circle, and I'd love to hear about the protesting and the empathy tents after that. But maybe we can start with the empathy circle. So for you, like, what is the empathy circle? For anybody who might be wondering, what is an empathy circle?
Well, it's a practice for small groups to dialogue using empathic listening or active listening. And it's sort of a structured dialogue process to make sure that everyone feels heard and understood to their satisfaction. And it's based on the work of Carl Rogers, who's a very famous therapist. He's considered one of the top, 2 or 3 clinical psychologists. And he just found that in his therapy work, all he would do is listen to people and, periodically reflect or recap what he understood that they were saying, just to make sure he was still in connection and still understanding them. And just that listening process itself was just, he felt, was kind of the sort of the magic ingredient in kind of all therapies, kind of boiled down to its essence, and which I would agree with. And then the empathy circle is sort of taking that out of the therapeutic, client, therapist, client, relationship, and making it mutual. So in therapy, the therapist is doing all the listening, and the client can also be just a narcissist, just talking, and they're not learning listening skills, which they can use in their family, with their friends, and in all their relationships. So the empathy circle is this mutual listening, learning to have those mutual listening skills, and sort of the mindset that gets created in that state of mutual listening. And it's pretty much core practice. If you want to be a therapist, you could use this to learn to be a therapist. You can just be a good friend. You're going to learn how to listen to your friends or family. And it's pretty much core to any conflict mediation. We bring people into the empathy circle who are in conflict, and it slows the conversation down, makes sure everyone feels heard and understood. And it's sort of amazing what sort of happens when people feel heard and understood, how conflict sort of starts to unravel and, find solutions. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I've noticed. So I listened to a bunch of them. I did actually join a couple of them that you held. And so I got to participate in a couple as well. And it is pretty amazing. It seems simple. It seems kind of, very foundational, but how much you realize how hard it is to actually listen and reflect back and pause in between, make sure people are feeling heard. And one thing I noticed too is a tendency for competitive conversation. People tend to compete over who wants to be heard and what they want to say. And it creates a little bit of a tension and just this kind of competitiveness. And this structure really just slows it down, like you say, and it just really, it puts people at ease, I feel like.
Yeah.
Right? It just puts you at ease, and you feel like, oh, I'm going to get my turn. I'm going to say what I need to say.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. And it's really a foundational process for sort of a more listening, sensitive way of being. Everyone gets heard. A lot of people talk about, oh, I do all the listening at home, nobody listens to me, right? And empathy is terrible because nobody's listening to me. And so my definition of empathy, it's a relationship. It's not just me doing all the listening or you doing all the listening. It's how do we really listen to each other? And that relationship is what the kind of the fullness of empathy is. And with the empathy circle, you have that foundation. And I use it a lot too in relationships, that, we have that as a foundation. And we also do it at the Empathy Center, for the staff and everyone. We use this. And then you can go into regular conversation. But then if you start feeling not heard, you can kind of shift back to that empathy circle. So it becomes sort of a floor, the ground floor that you can always sort of fall back on if things start heating up or you don't start feeling heard or understood. So
Yeah, it sets a good pace. And I did notice quite a bit of overlap between John Vervaeke's work as well. So I did one of his workshops, Dialogos, the Circling into Dialogos workshop.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's similar in the way that it's a structured conversation. He has a bunch of practices involved in it too, but it's very much similar where you're kind of passing it around, and it does seem like you're feeding something in the middle, and you're all kind of contributing in an equal way, and it's just really effective, and there's so many benefits of it.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're speaking about sort of a talking stick sort of approach that people take turns. There's sort of that methodology.
Yeah, it seems
and
like
I imagine there's a lot of other practices within that.
Yeah, I think the talking stick is similar in that. It does seem like there's a little bit more in this with the reflection back. So one thing I've noticed, especially like I've followed John's work for a while now, so I'm very seeing through the lens of John Vervaeke. So one thing I've noticed too is this switch between meditation and contemplation. And so when you're listening to someone, you're really concentrating on what they're saying, and it's surprisingly hard to just reflect back what someone says. Like they can say something, and I've heard it a number of times in the circles of people being like, "I'm sorry, I didn't catch that," and it was just a 15-second chunk or a 30-second chunk, and it really challenges you to really listen and make sure that you're paying attention. And then when you are able to speak, it's also kind of like a contemplation, right? You get to kind of sense into yourself, notice what's going on, notice what's coming alive for you as well.
Yeah, it has benefits for the speaker and the listener. So we could probably do a whole discussion just on what's the landscape, right, of that empathy circle, which is really interesting. You know, I hear a lot of people, talking about the benefits, like you're saying, like, oh, usually I'm kind of trying to think about what I'm going to respond to, or I feel nervous to find my way into the conversation, and then there's the aspect of it takes real concentration to listen. It's like you really got to focus, and people are like tired, after. It's a bit exhausting if you're not familiar with it. So it kind of sets a tone for I would say, an empathic way of being. It's a different way of relating. It's pretty much what, for the country to kind of shift from the competitive model that we have, and, all the sort of dysfunction that you have in, any families, from the wealthy to the poor, or whatever their culture. There's sort of a lot of dysfunction, people just not listening to each other. And if we can just raise this skill, throughout the culture, I think it would just, create a lot more well-being. And it is sort of a starting point, like it's just a first step, but it's a big, important first step. And it's very doable, I think. Like if we can get, Biden and Trump to do an empathy circle, for example, I mean, everyone would see it, and it would because you learn the practice by observation too, that it could quickly spread this. And, our goal in the center is to just teach everyone in the world how to take part in one of these, mm-hmm. and be able to facilitate it, and, show other people how to do it as well. So it's just a core, to so much, it's simple. It's like, right. Some people think it's just like too simplistic, but that's the beauty of it, is you don't have to go to college. You don't have to take a lot of workshops, and you can get started pretty quickly with the process.
So you mentioned the political divide, and that's something that's, I think, pretty obvious to a lot of people right now. And you set up an empathy tent during a couple protests. And I was wondering if you could kind of tell us about that, because that's an intense setting to set that up.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw them, but some of them were really intense.
Yeah, I saw a couple of videos.
I'm going to just close the shade here so I don't have the light on me. 1 second.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so for anyone who's watching, Edwin set up an empathy tent. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll tell a little bit about that. So actually, it kind of fits in with how it kind of came up with the basics of the empathy circle. Is I was in, Occupy Wall Street was here in Berkeley, where I'm near. And so I thought, well, we need an empathy tent there. People are talking about the 99 against the 1%, and I'm like for 100% empathy. So set up a tent there, offered listening to the people who were, camped out there as well as anyone else. Did art stuff. We did those talking circle approaches.
Right.
And I just found that the talking stick, it just, we'd have a big group and one person would sort of still dominate. They would do more of the talking. And, a lot of times they were really in distress and needed the time. So it was sort of there where I started thinking of, mutual active listening. So the idea was is we have an encampment of, a couple hundred to say 200 people. Instead of having like talking circles with this talking stick circles, and like these general assemblies where people speak to a big group, if we had everybody in the camp in small groups doing empathy circles in groups of 4, for an hour or so, then they get up and change and sit with other people and then change with other people. They would be learning the empathic process. They would be feeling heard. It would be a very democratic, grassroots way of changing the whole encampment from, just being totally dysfunctional, everybody at each other's throats. And so that was sort of, and then before I could really do it though, the police closed down the camp. And so I did start working online with other people to sort of develop the process, but that was sort of where it came from. It's like a different way of creating the community of small group discussions versus, there's usually the guru type or, the person who sort of dominates and everybody follows them.
Right.
But this is where it's a very grassroots, more egalitarian, democratic, I think, sort of approach. So that was there, and kind of moving towards the political left and right. That then when that was 2011, so, kind of worked online doing empathy circles, but then, and we would go out and offer listening, at street level listening in Berkeley and other places, and just listen to people could come and sit at the street. And we do some empathy circles. But then when Trump was elected, the political right, came to Berkeley, and then the political left would counter demonstrate, Antifa, Be Proud Boys, Antifa, kind of battling it out. We would take the empathy tent, set it up and offer listening to both sides, and then also try to bring the sides in to dialogue with each other. And, we had real success with that. We went to right-wing rallies where it was only the right wing, right. Setting up the empathy tent to reach out and offer listening. And then a filmmaker from LA saw what we were doing in Berkeley, said, you're the only ones doing something like this. Would you come to LA in an impeach Trump rally
Right.
and kind of mediate between them? And we did. And in Los Angeles, we set up on the City Hall, the lawn, or if you know LA, but there's a City Hall, and there's a police station across the street where the counter right-wing demonstrator were. And during the day, we brought in one person from each side and did an empathy circle. And each of them, except one, ended with the participants giving each other hugs.
Oh, wow.
At the end.
Wow.
And on the other side of the street, they're screaming and yelling at each other, and the police are kind of keeping them apart. So, you can just see that, and we're just doing active listening and empathy circles, and it just works, Yeah,
that contrast of that you can see it across the street. It's going on across the street, the chaos, and then you bring these two people in, and then it ends with a hug. That's a pretty successful. It must have felt
huge.
Pretty good to see.
Yeah. If you go to, it's in a documentary, Trump Phobia, What Both Sides Fear.
Right. Okay.
The filmmaker, and there's an excerpt, on my site too, like a 10-minute excerpt that kind of shows the highlights from that. And you can see the people hugging, doing the mediation, and it just works. But
sure, I'll add that to the show description notes,
okay.
And then people can kind of click on that and check it out. So you did this politically, and I think I remember a comment you said that you've also done it with your family, and it was like a 6-hour empathy circle.
We did
or a longer one.
we did a 5-hour one
5 hour
once, but it wasn't for conflict. It was just like, if you're doing it in your family, you don't want to start with conflict. You want to start with what's a good thing that's happened to you, right. So you're using the empathy to just hear each other's stories of something meaningful that happened. And then people develop trust in the process. So when conflict does happen, that you've got the tools and the trust in the process to be able to address. But in that one, I think the topic was just, what are your memories of when you were a child?
Right. Okay.
And we talked, and then it was into about the third hour. It then conflicts, from under the surface. I can almost feel the space. It's like a 3-dimensional space, and we're talking, sharing these fun stories. And then these conflicts would sort of bubble up,
Right.
into the space, and they would be sort of talked through and sort of worked out. And then another one would sort of bubble up. And and then we've done, family conflict circles and mediation. And, I've got a lot of stories, just about doing that in families. And I've also done it for other families too, using empathy circle to mediate. So it's very powerful, for supporting families. And one thing I would add, like you hear a lot about restorative justice, for conflict mediation, but I don't like that as a term. I think it's restorative empathy is a more powerful approach, because in your family, it's not like, hey, we got a conflict, we need justice, right?
Right. No one's going to jail.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds too heavy. So
Right.
in the family, it's like you want, a loving, caring, empathic relationship where everybody listens to everyone. So we want a culture of empathy in the family. And then if there's a conflict, we want a restorative empathy circle. We want to restore the loving, empathic relationship that we have. So I think that framing, I'm trying to get away from that whole restorative practices or restorative justice to kind of a restorative empathy sort of a framing.
Yeah, no, that's good. I like that, because I've started asking, some people around me if they want to participate in this. One of the challenges I've found is just getting people maybe interested or open to just trying it, right? I think sometimes empathy, people think, maybe I'm just going to sit in a circle and just talk about my feelings. And I feel like it's so much more than that. So I have tried it. I've gotten my dad to do it with me a couple times. I've got my wife, does it with me sometimes. So I am looking, what I'm hoping this conversation does is kind of show some more of the value and some more of what it's about. And then ideally, I'd like to, on this channel, have some empathy circles about a bunch of different topics, because I think there's something really good here.
How did it go with your family? What was sort of the dynamics that happened?
Well, my dad definitely, he saw the value for sure. So he's willing to talk with me about it. And then when it came to, are you willing to try it? There was some slight hesitation, right? But he did it, and it was good. He definitely noticed how it can be valuable for businesses too and companies. So he's very business oriented. So for him, it was through the lens of business and professional interactions and communication, and then noticing in meetings how people would compete and talk over each other. So that was kind of more of a business and professional lens. And then as far as personally with my wife, I find for us, it's a chance to just kind of connect. And at first it feels a little bit weird, right? Because at first it feels a bit structured, and it's like, it's kind of going through the motions. But yeah, I think if you give it time, the process starts to emerge, and it starts to, like, we didn't use it for conflict. It wasn't for a fight. Again, I was just kind of trying to go in lightly, like you said. So it was just, I don't even know if we set a topic. It was just kind of what's alive for you right now, which I love that you do. You offer that of either this topic or whatever's alive.
Yeah, that we want to give people freedom to go wherever they want, so they don't feel hemmed in. And for me, the free speech is a big component of it. It's like, this is an empathy circle, no political correctness.
Right.
Whatever you have to say, you will be heard to your satisfaction. So feel free to say whatever you want and share any feeling that you want
Right.
too. It's all okay. So just that sense of freedom to be who you are. And it's an exchange that you got to listen to the other person too,
Right.
because they're going to be free to say whatever they want too. So, but that's, yeah, so I'm very big free speech. I just make it really explicit. You're free to say what you want and encourage it too. Because I find that if people can just be free, even to express their judgments and so forth. So once they've kind of gotten it out of their system, they start getting more real anyway. But if you have to kind of repress something, it's still there. So,
yeah, that's a great point. So on that note, what have been the more challenging empathy circles or moments in the empathy circles that you've kind of experienced?
Well, families is the hardest. It's really, can be tough. I had one where, one family member was just really upset with, her husband, my brother. And, she was in a lot of pain.
Right.
And then I was listening to her, reflecting back. But then I wanted to speak to my brother. So I wanted to kind of, share the attention so that he would have a chance. But she was like really upset that she thought I should select her to speak to,
right?
Because she's the one in pain, and so keep speaking to her, right? But it's my choice as the speaker. I get to choose who I want, and my choice was to speak to him to bring him into the conversation. And she got really angry and just stopped doing the empathic process and was kind of criticizing me and just and then not, and that's sort of a mediation sort of a state when people sort of break out of the process, the agreement of the process, then I try to bring them back into it and just reflect back what it is that they're saying. Yeah, you think I'm a real idiot. What I'm doing is really stupid. You think it's all full of shit and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I just reflect back and then try to bring them back into, are you now willing, you feel heard? Are you willing to continue the process? And yeah, she would not get back into the process, even, with all the listening, trying to bring her back in. And then then it was my thing was, okay, I'm here to do an empathy circle. I'm not here to have a freestyle battle. And if you don't want to do an empathy circle, I'm going to go. And I'm probably never going to speak to you again unless we do an empathy circle in the process. And then it was like when she saw the determination on my part that this is over, she didn't want to like totally lose the relationship. Then she went back into it. We continued. So you'll see that kind of stuff in the circles. There was another one. We had set up the empathy tent at UC Berkeley, near Sproul Plaza. And there was a guy from the political right who was an artist from LA. He was there. And he just wanted to sort of make fun of the whole circle and sort of not do it. And it became a real test of wills. He said, I am listening, but he wasn't. You got to reflect back what you're saying. And he was like, he wanted to kind of make fun of everything. And it was a real test of, are we going to do this or not? And then my friend who's also a mediator, he sort of took over and he said, you are not listening. And then he kind of got into it and it all kind of worked. So there's, real tension can kind of come up, and how do you keep people in the process, that, or they might say, oh, this is really boring or stupid, or, so I just reflect back. You think it's really boring and stupid, do you feel heard? And I say, oh, let's just give it a try. Give it, to begin with, it sounds sort of stiff. There's a little bit of anxiety learning a new process. So there is, and when we do the training, we have a whole section on challenges, and the challenge is, how do we keep people in the circle, in the process? Yeah.
One thing I love about what you do is is everything is through the work of the empathy circle. So your development of the building a center for empathy is all done through using empathy circles. And even the training that you do, everything's posted on YouTube. So I haven't been able to make the dates line up to actually participate in one of the training sessions. But I did go through and I watched a full training session and kind of imaginally participated in it, right? And it was quite entertaining when you guys did the challenges. It was quite entertaining.
Yeah, how was that for you? Just kind of watching it.
It was good. I learned a lot. A lot of it too is about even how to facilitate just that initial instruction on how to do it. Kind of bringing everything in, and I like the idea of starting soft, right? Like nothing too heavy right away. But I thought, like you said before, even by observing it, I feel like there's almost like a contact high, right? There's kind of you pick up stuff just by being a listener in it. So I have found it to be very valuable. But I am hoping to participate in more and hopefully facilitate some more. Just more kind of play with the structure, not the structure as in change it too much, but play with the topics, play with kind of the people that I'm doing it with, and just more participatory stuff.
Oh, great. Yeah. So, the topic, there's always different topics. I did one with John Vervaeke on facing fear, or what our fears were.
I didn't see that one. Where's that one posted?
It's there somewhere. If you do John Vervaeke fear, it'll probably come up.
Right. Okay.
Which I think would be a good topic to really focus on, because I think our fears is a lot of what sort of blocks a lot of energy. And by constantly just facing the latest fears, whatever level they are, the anxieties, the concern, you kind of move through them. And so I was kind of imagining like fixed groups, you have your friends of 3 or 4 people, and every week you just meet to talk about what are concerns, anxieties, fears you're dealing with, as a way of sort of facing them on an ongoing basis. I think that's just a topic that I think could be very, kind of powerful.
Yeah, I agree. I think oftentimes we have a tendency to kind of be surface of the iceberg, or tip of the iceberg to tip of the iceberg. And I find this process to be something that really allows for a deepening. And when you have the space to share, and especially when you start to build that trust and that space between people, oftentimes someone will say something and someone else says, yeah, like that's exactly kind of how I'm feeling, right? And you realize how similar a lot of experiences are.
Yeah, a lot of people mention that. They say, I had this idea that I really want to get out there. And as I listened more and more, other people said it for me. I didn't even have to say it, because it's sort of in the air, right? This thing that they want to say, and it just gets sort of revealed, it gets spoken to, over time. So, and there's other aspects of this too, is sort of role playing. So for me, empathy is sensing into the experience of others. And so you're really doing that with an interview. You're listening, sensing into, my experience more than probably vice versa. And so there is that aspect, sort of a direct empathy towards others, which is what I would say is kind of one aspect of empathy. Another aspect of empathy is self-empathy, sensing into myself. And so as you're asking me questions, listening to me, kind of giving me space, I'm kind of going deeper and deeper into my own experience and sharing that. And that's sort of what I would consider self-empathy, And so the empathy circle helps in both, right? It helps in self-empathy, and it helps in empathizing, sensing into others. And another aspect of empathy is what I would call imaginative empathy, that we can imagine ourselves as anything and in that role. So, as an actor, Meryl Streep imagines herself as Margaret Thatcher and just sort of embodies that whole role and sort of speaks sort of authentically, within that awareness of being Margaret Thatcher or Julia Child or one of the other characters she's acting. And then there's another, and along that same imaginative empathy is sort of role play. For example, in one of our circles, I remember one woman, she was saying she has creative idea, and then her judgment comes in and kind of beats up her creative idea, creates pain, and then she doesn't want any creative ideas because it's just too painful.
Right.
So we did role plays of I was her pain, someone else was her creativity, someone else was her judgment.
Right.
And we had an empathy circle imagining those roles, but using empathic listening for her internal dialogue, to have an internal empathic dialogue that she could observe, kind of trying to work out that sort of dynamic. So that's a whole nother aspect of the empathy circles. You can bring in those kind of role plays too.
Yeah, it's a fascinating move. So you're saying there's this empathy outward towards people, and we can build that, but then there's also this self-empathy that we have to develop, or that is beneficial to develop. And it reminds me of I don't know if you're familiar with internal family systems.
Perfect, exactly it. That's it. Yeah, you got it.
So it sounds like a very very similar but imaginative process. And again, with John Vervaeke, he brings in the imaginal. I think it's Corbin who brings in the imaginary versus the imaginal. So if anyone's into John Vervaeke, there's a video on that. I forget which one, but the imaginal space is something that's so powerful. And in hearing what you shared, like how did that work out for this person? Did they have a breakthrough, or did they build?
I can't remember. It was a while ago. It was I think it was a breakthrough because it went for like 45 minutes or almost an hour. So you just start unraveling. I think there's two things. One, you start getting to the fear. You start hearing what the fear is about. So that's that's pretty powerful to say, oh, I'm afraid because of this. And it's actually a positive thing. You know, it's like there's a reason for it. So there's, I can't specifically remember but we have done, like in the training, the more recent trainings, we added a 6th session, which was on conflict mediation. So we would do role plays, scenarios where it's a family that the parent has died, left a couple $100,000 inheritance, and all the kids think that they deserve the inheritance for different reasons.
Right.
And then they sort of battle it out in an empathy circle, and the facilitator facilitates that. So that's a lot of fun too. It's so it's again, that's another imagination using the empathy. The thing that's different with just like family systems is there's family systems, but with empathic listening, active listening.
Right.
I think is another layer to it, so that the parts inside are actually listening to each other and in less internal conflicts. I don't think internal family systems does that. It's more of an acting, right? You get out there and you kind of act out those scenarios.
I think it's similar in the way that I think the idea behind it is that each part has something to say, right? I think it was developed by this idea that I think it was Richard Schwartz, and maybe I'll share a clip of that as well. But he talks about these parts. He would have these clients saying, well, a part of me wants this and a part of me wants this, and they'd be in conflict, right? And I think the idea was he noticed that there was one woman who had like a daughter and like almost like a mother, that it was a similar dynamic. And he used to do external family systems. So he tried the same kind of mediation techniques, or that kind of, getting them to dialogue, kind of similar, but I think it's a bit different than what you're doing. But to just try and, there's a reason why they're there, and there's something that they have to say.
Yeah.
And hearing that out often kind of eases or calms it a little bit, just, acknowledging and everybody wants to be heard, including the parts of yourself, right?
That's it. Yeah. It's powerful to do that. Yeah.
So how have you found like the in-person versus like the Zoom or online?
I like both. I just like the convenience of Zoom. It's a lot can get conveyed In person, of course, you have the three-dimensional space that does add a sort of a richness. And with COVID, I just started doing a lot more online. And now we have the center. So we're kind of scaling up to in person. I think the in person is going to be, just much more effective in sort of getting the ball rolling in terms of people getting involved. We had a group up a couple of weeks ago, like 26 people, gave them a tour of the property, then went and just did empathy circles. And it was just a lot of fun. And, I think it's going to be, I think that to get things kind of happening is, I think we need to be in person, and especially the empathy tents. What I'm thinking here is we just start offering workshops at the center, doing empathy circles and, any other kind of events too. Then we do the trainings, and part of that's going to be for the empathy tent, learning how to staff the empathy tent.
Right.
And we'll start in Santa Barbara, offering listening, at the street level, and at the parks or farmers markets, or somebody had mentioned the Planned Parenthood, where there's always demonstrators, just set up there. So find the conflict areas and go to those. And I'd also thought if there was, I don't think there's too many shootings in Santa Barbara, but if we could take like the empathy tent to these places where people are really in pain, we set up and we offer listening to that we then kind of spread the empathy tent sort of national, international, kind of a chapter based.
Right.
And we have a training center here that, you could set up. I don't know, where are you located, Nick?
So I'm in London, Ontario, Canada.
Okay.
Yeah. So near Toronto.
Okay. Yeah. So, you can just get some signs. We have some T-shirts, empathy, we listen, and you can just go and do street level listening, and then kind of scale up to where maybe even have a tent and a whole group. And so we do sort of more of a social empathic activism, if we want to really change the society, I think we got to get out to the streets to kind of get people's attention. And I can send you a list too. I got, probably have like 20, 30 articles, media, recognition for the empathy tent. That's where we just got the most, media, like Fox and Friends, Breitbart, LA Times, Sacramento Bee, all these papers. When we go and set up, we get a lot of attention for it. So how are you about sort of a empathic social action? What's your sort of feeling about that?
So currently for me, I mean, I'm working on it myself. Like I'm kind of spreading out, right? So like at first I'm starting with just me and maybe, my relationships, my close relationships, seeing if I can do it in that way. I think this podcast would be an opportunity. Like what I'm drawn to is maybe playing with it in the sense of like creativity. Like I'm friends with a bunch of musicians, and I'm a musician and I songwrite. So creative process is one area, and then I also am interested in like maybe like grief. Having people talk about grief. That's something that a lot of people share. And then another being kind of maybe influenced by John Vervaeke of like we bring in virtues like courage and humility and patience and all this, and then circling around that. And as far as like activism in the community, I'm not quite at that point, but it's an aspiration of kind of moving outward from this and hopefully expanding into a spot that it can actually start to influence and ripple out from there.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's. So I think we can have. It's really what's needed in the culture. So much talk now about woke and anti-woke,
right,
and what's going on. And it's sort of it's us versus them, and they're kind of stuck in this. And even the anti-woke, it's sort of a criticism of the criticizers, right? So everything's the judging the judgers, and they're all sort of pointing out the lack of empathy on the other side, is my sense, right? And they all have, it's all accurate, but it's like, I think the empathy, is sort of the way forward. It's like, have your own views, but we have to be willing to sit down and listen to each other, and, make that a primary social value. We need the politicians, ideally, every month the Democrats and Republicans would have an empathy circle in Congress that's recorded about how do we bridge the divides, and they'd be modeling how to do it. And when I ran for Congress, here in the in the area, and that was the first thing I did is I reached out to the other candidates and asked if they would do an empathy circle, and they did. They
did do it.
Yeah, two of them did. The Republicans did. The scheduling didn't work, but two of the three Democrats did. And then someone saw it too in our group, and they set it up in Nancy Pelosi's district in San Francisco. I think it was two or three of the candidates, did take part. Nancy Pelosi, of course, didn't. And so the establishment candidates like, we don't need to talk to you. But that's what we need to bring them to the table, And I've talked to our Governor Newsom here in California, talked to him twice about doing an empathy circle. And, I think we need an activism where to bring them to the table, we set up like the empathy tent at the state capitol, go on a hunger strike. We're not leaving here until you take part in an empathy circle with the other side. Yeah. So you can see I'm sort of into this. Yeah,
that determination.
Activism. We can make this happen, but building up like you're doing, I think is, good to get those skills and develop your community and stuff. So I think that's really the way to do it.
Yeah, for me, I'm just trying to kind of start where I'm at right now, and even this podcast is an idea to do that, right? Of to start bringing these things that I see value in and that I really want to share with people, right? And starting to spread that, and hopefully, I mean, it's an interesting thing because there's a vulnerability to it. I feel like, I don't know if you felt like that when you started, that there's a vulnerability to maybe like, hey, do you want to do this empathy circle with me? Or if you felt always like a confidence with it, or like, did you experience that?
No, there's people, you're asking people to try something different, and there's a sort of hesitancy, and I can feel the barrier to it. It's like, hey, this is a little weird, and how do you sort of make the case? If Oprah would do an empathy circle with me or others, and then suddenly everybody sees it, it would sort of say, hey, this is good to do. And then we probably wouldn't have that hesitancy or if Trump and Biden did it, then it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. We can do that too. So, but as it is now, I do feel that kind of hesitancy in our training. We say we have people go do an empathy circle in their family if they can. And we say, tell them it's an assignment. This is an assignment. And if they would help you out, do this assignment. Right. So it's just one way how you get a foot in the door.
That's a good way to do it. It's an assignment. Yeah, because that's one of the challenges. And even I see the value in even my workplace, right? How it would be great even to bring into the workplace, to a family, to a team, right? Like team building. There's just so much to it that is valuable. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this being kind of the start of kind of opening this up. And so if there's anyone out there listening who's interested in participating in this, please visit Edwin's website, and please reach out to me if you do want to do this, because I want to participate more. So for this training, it's free training, right?
Yep. It's free training. We had one that just started. Actually, it starts tomorrow.
Right.
And it's like 4 times a year, 4 weeks, 2.5 hours a week, and maybe an hour or two of homework. And so it's we've cut it down to 4 weeks. It's been up to 6 weeks, but right now, and you can take it multiple times. So the first time you just take it as a participant, and then you take it 2, 3, 4, 5 times to learn how to become a trainer of it. So you kind of keep learning more and more. So it's a step-by-step, kind of getting more and more skills for doing the training. And then we're going to be doing a training in person. So if you're in Santa Barbara on September 16th and 17th, you can you take the training in person there, and it's free. It's kind of like donation. If you want to donate, you're welcome to. But we're trying to make it just super accessible for everyone.
Yeah, and what came to mind for me is I was watching some of the trainings, and I remember it was near the end of the trainings, and he brought up a bit of skepticism about it, right? He's like, yeah, like I like it, I see value, but there's a part of me that, is a bit skeptical about it too. And I remember you almost got excited about like conflict or some disagreement, or it's like, oh yeah, like bring that out.
Yeah. So what is people's skepticism? I don't remember what a specific one.
It was pretty soft. Yeah.
Yeah. It was more, are people going to want to do this? Sort of like your experience. Like, how do you bring people into this? Are they going to want to do it? Is it effective? Does it really work?
Right.
Is it really going to help? I think it does. It changes. People tell me all the time it changes kind of their personality. I remember an example, someone saying that, because they're in the empathy circle, usually they'd get more triggered by their father when he would be speaking, but they had sort of more space to be able to listen to him. And I think that's what the empathy circle does, is we all need to be heard. So you're kind of getting your empathy being heard battery charged in the empathy circle. So it creates a sort of a resilience, a spaciousness that you don't feel so desperate to have to battle to be heard. You've got that, and then you can be more present, for other people, and hopefully, you can bring them into a mutually empathic dialogue. So I always say, I want a culture of empathy where we all listen to each other, but I'm willing to be the first listener.
Right.
It's like somebody's got to prime the pump. So I'm willing, and a lot of times you just listen to people and you got to listen for 20 minutes or something. And then they start feeling heard, and they'll actually say, oh, and what's your opinion on this? Right. So it's like, okay, now we're making it more mutual. So, but having that capacity so you don't feel so desperate to feel heard, doing the empathy circle is sort of a charging station, sort of metaphorically, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I think that's a great metaphor, because I think oftentimes, it's simple. Like sometimes in certain dynamics or certain relationships, especially since starting this process, I've noticed really trying to tune into my my skills of listening and just attending to, and I've noticed that like, first of all, I like listening, I like hearing about people, and two, when they get the chance to do that, it does seem like there's a value, and then there's like a softening, or there's like a little bit of a calming element to it. But being the person who always listens can sometimes be a bit draining, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not a real relationship, it's not, and it feels connecting when it's mutual, right? It feels kind of warm, feels comfortable. And especially as an artist, how do we take this into the creativity, into the creative realm? And there are practices that sort of build on this, for example, Carl Rogers sort of developed the basic active listening, empathic listening approach. And one of his students, Gene Gendlin, I don't know if you know of him, called focusing. Have you heard of that process?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So there's a lot of different directions this goes, whole toolkits that are based on this first step. And the focusing was Gene Gendlin is a grad student, University of Chicago, I think it was, with Rogers. He was curious, like, why do people grow in therapy and others kind of don't? There's a forward motion, problems get solved. So he evaluated a lot of different therapies, and the one that what he found is that they all kind of worked, more or less pretty much the same. But what it was is the people who grew were the clients or the speakers who would speak about a felt experience that they were having. in their body, like, feeling all this curiosity, I'm feeling this excitement, or I feel a little heaviness and it's kind of located here in my body. So they would be sensitive to the felt experience in their body, and they would share the pre-intellectual felt experience, and they would explore it sort of from moment to moment, how it was shifting. Because if you share it, like, oh, I'm feeling some constriction in this part of my body. If the person reflects it, oh, you're feeling constriction in this part of your body, it's sort of giving it space to express itself in the space. And that space starts shifting. That feeling will shift. It will grow, it'll contract, another feeling will come in. So you kind of stay with the felt experience moment to moment, sharing it with someone else. And it was those people who did that that would have forward motion, really solving a problem. And the focusing is, how do you tap into those felt experiences? And so the focusing community has a whole, toolkit that is pretty much about, I would say, self-empathy. How do you empathize with yourself in your inner landscape? How do you not sort of get into an intellectualization, but stay with the felt experience and allow that to move forward and develop? And I would say that's very much about music, right? You're tapping into the felt experience and trying to give that felt experience form. And how does that move? And it's the reflection, getting the reflection by someone else of it, that kind of helps with the blooming and the transformation or the growth of those, in development of those feelings.
Yeah, I think that was really well said. I think I've been somewhat doing something like that without knowing that it's called focusing, but I often reflect back, and I'm not sure where it happened exactly. I've been doing a bunch of different, not workshops, but just different exercises, different things, like just exploring, right? And so when you guys did the what does reason feel like, that was really fascinating because it kept going between the conceptual and then back into the body, right? It kept kind of going into, oh, it's like this, and then, but oh, it feels like this. And then so it kept doing this back and forth, which was kind of reminds me of what you're saying, right? This checking in with what's happening.
Yeah, that was a fun one. I think that's a really, because reason is usually seen as different from feeling. Yeah. And it's actually, there is a felt experience to reason. So I would have loved to have done more of those to really, in terms of a topic, I think that's worth, 20, 30 empathy circles just to hear other people. What is reason? Because it's counteracting the duality of feeling and reason, to saying actually feeling, reason is a felt experience.
Yeah, and like the mind-body connection, right? Like that duality, and then it really puts them together. And I agree, there was so much there, and especially with all of you had so much to contribute, and you articulated it so well that it was. I think that was my favorite video that I've seen of this process for now. For now, anyways, I haven't gotten too deep, but it reminded me actually of one cool one would be, what does music feel like? That might be a cool empathy circle, right? Like, what does it feel like?
Yeah, it just explore the different questions.
Yeah. So for the building a center of empathy, that's your brother purchased that property, and then he asked you to kind of direct that. So that's something that you're working on right now, and you're also working on. So I guess you mentioned a little bit about that and what's going on with that. And actually, if anyone's interested, they can actually see you guys developing the ideas and all the planning and stuff like that actually in your videos in the Empathy Circle. Yeah,
we've been using Empathy Circle to kind of have an open house for the neighbors and anyone in the world that wants to. I hope you'll come and share some of your ideas too.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah.
Every Saturday at 1, right now it's 1 p.m. Pacific. So we go for, an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, and we just talk about the center and ideas for it. We'd love to have music there. We have art area that we want to set up for music, the arts. So really bring that. I think it's an important, modality, creative way of expression. And so, yeah, it's really, how do we, it's part of a movement, and hope, we can kind of bring people into the movement to kind of get out of this polarization that we have, in the country and in the world, and it's just getting worse, seems to be getting worse. And I do think that, this can be a center for sort of leading that project or that work. And also something that came to me with John Vervaeke, he was willing to have an empathy circle with Jordan Peterson.
Oh yeah.
So I just haven't had time to put it together, to write it all up. But we had actually put out a feeler to Jordan Peterson at the time he was traveling, so he couldn't do it. And I've since talked to Warren Farrell, who I did an interview of him. He did the Boy Crisis, and he's done a lot of workshops with Jordan Peterson, at his school, and been interviewed 3 or 4 times by Jordan Peterson. So I thought we could bring them all together and do an empathy circle to model the empathic listening. Because Jordan Peterson has talked a lot about the importance of, active listening. He's referenced Rogers, a lot, but he doesn't have a tool set for how you actually do it. And he did his talk at Cambridge. I don't know if you saw that one, but he was invited to speak at Cambridge, and he actually talked about listening, it seemed like, and if we can get them, I think it would be just like the Vervaeke one. People could see it and they learn by observation. It's not, So anyway, that's another kind of idea.
It would help it catch fire a little bit more.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. So do you have a hard out time on this? Do you have a time that you have to go?
No, I'm in no hurry.
Okay, because I was wondering if you would be willing to maybe model it a little bit, if we could have a little kind of, like a model empathy circle for, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes if you want, or half hour, or whatever you want to do.
Excellent. What topic? Want to do the concerns, anxieties, or fears?
Sure, yeah. Okay. We can do that. That one's alive for you right now? Yeah, okay. So I got my timer here. I can run that, or if you want to do it, I know you're obviously more experienced in facilitating.
Good, 4 minutes or so.
4 minutes? Okay. So generally, do you want to give a little bit of an introduction of how it would go? Because generally there'd be 4 people is ideal?
Yeah, we usually 4 people. What we're doing here is more like a buddy call. We call it we just do 2 people, but we'd have 4 people. One of us, I can be the first listener. You'll speak. You're going to share an idea or two, which is usually, a minute or so. You pause, and I'm going to kind of reflect back or recap my understanding, in my own words. What did I really understand that you said? And then you'll check, did I, hear you correctly? If I did, then you just continue with what you're saying. If I didn't really understand you to your satisfaction, you might say it again in other words. And so it'll just continue for the 4 minutes, or even if you just do 2 minutes, you kind of run out of things to say. You can just say, I feel fully heard, or something like that, just to indicate that you're done with your turn. Then it becomes my turn. And if we were in a group of 4, we would, be talking between the 4 of us using this process instead of just back and forth.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay, so I have the timer set up for 4 minutes. So our topic is what? Anxieties, concerns, and fears? Is that around the empathy circle, or is that just in general?
About life.
Okay.
Or whatever's alive for you. You can just talk about anything.
Or whatever's alive for you. I like that element too. Okay, so do you want to speak first, or do you want to listen first?
I'll listen.
Okay. All right, so I'll hit the timer here, and then we'll give this a shot, and we'll show kind of what it's about. So I'll hit start here. So yeah, concerns, anxieties, and fears. I guess what's coming to mind for me is what that feels like. What fear or anxiety feels like, and I often feel it in my solar plexus or my nervous system.
Yeah, so you're kind of just sensing into what does that feel like, a fear or anxiety, and it's in your solar plexus, and that you tend to feel that.
Yeah, and now that you mention it, I think that's one of the main places, but I think it exists in other spots as well. And I'm just kind of starting to open that up to see where else that kind of exists.
Yeah, so you thought the solar plexus, but you're realizing it's in other parts of your body. So you're sort of exploring other parts of your body to sort of locate those feelings.
Yeah, so I think sometimes it's in the solar plexus, sometimes it can be like shoulders and neck, right? So sometimes it can be a bit of tightness and constriction.
So it can be in the shoulders, kind of a constriction in the upper part of your body, kind of moving forward, kind of constricting.
Yeah, and I think it's like a draining too, right? It's like there's like a draining element, like energetically. It's like a tiring or a pulling or a consuming, right? It's like taking energy.
Yes, that anxiety or fear, it kind of takes energy and has maybe a pulling kind of a quality that drains energy.
Yeah, yeah. It's like if you go through a day where you're more anxious or more, or I'll use I instead of you. If I go through a day that I'm more anxious or more fearful, I feel a lot more tired at the end of the day.
And just a day of anxiety, fear is just, you feel just kind of tired after like a day of that, more so maybe than if you don't have that.
Yeah, like it's if I didn't have it, when I start to reflect on that, there's maybe an easing or a lightness or an opening, and even as I say it, right, I can feel myself kind of perk up a little bit and open up my shoulders.
Yeah, even just speaking to the feeling of kind of an openness to it, your body starting to sort of embody that and
Right.
open itself up too, just by thinking about it.
Yeah, yeah, because I think I held a little bit of anxiety even in this conversation, right? It's an interview, it's or a podcast, we haven't really spoke one on one before, so there's this kind of anxiety of, is it going to be good? What are people going to be thinking?
Yeah, so even in this interview, it's like a lot of kind of concerns, anxiety about is it going to be good? What are people going to think? Just how is it going to be? So just feeling some anxiety in your body around this.
Right. So, and as I more spoke about the opening and what it doesn't feel like, I could feel it in myself. I could feel myself kind of rise up in my spine. And I feel like I could see it in you too.
Oh, yeah. As you were sharing kind of that opening up too, you could see me even opening up too. So it's kind of like contagious.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes me want to, sometimes it makes me want to focus more on the non fear and anxiety than the fear and anxiety. But I think it's important to acknowledge both.
Yeah, you want to kind of focus more on non-fear, non-anxiety, but it's important really to hold both and awareness of both of those feelings.
Hmm. Yeah, so I think I feel heard with that. I'm about 4 minutes, so yeah.
Okay.
No, thank you. I feel heard.
All right. Then speak back. What's the anxiety? For me, that there's all kinds of, I've kind of done exploration of fear and anxiety, and it's like there's so many manifestations of it, and each one is sort of different to something I've noticed. So the one I'm sort of feeling more, sort of more of a heaviness, kind of up in the head, a constriction in sort of the upper part of my body, head.
Right. So you've done a lot of exploration around fear and anxieties, and the one that's kind of coming to you right now, or just that's kind of standing out to you right now, is a bit of heaviness around the head area.
Yeah, it's more like a weight. It's like a heavy weight, and it's just from all the stuff. I mean, this is a lot to manage, this retreat center, a lot of concerns coming up about its development and kind of by doing enough. And and there's so many details to deal with that all the details, cause constriction and sort of anxiety and sort of stress in my body.
So you're seeing this, building the center. There's a lot of concerns and a lot of things to cover, and are you doing enough? And a lot of thoughts and stuff going around that. And there was the word of weight there was a weight and a heaviness and a constriction to it, kind of around the head area.
And I would like to just do more empathy and this sort of exploration, because it's a lot of fun. It kind of opens things up for me, but there's just the nuts and bolts of, just the hard work of everything that needs to be done. That there's a constriction, and I can actually feel a little twinge of anxiety, kind of a more anxiety down here in this part too.
Right. So you're noticing this difference between the wanting to the nuts and bolts of the empathy center and actually kind of just wanting to do more empathy circles, because that's where the juice is, that's where it opens up for you. And so you're noticing that, but it needs to be done. And then as you're kind of talking, you're noticing it maybe move down from your head. Maybe there's a little bit of this area as well.
Yeah, it's more of a little of a biting, kind of a biting sort of a feeling. This is like a heavy weight. This is more like kind of a knife, kind of slicing into kind of my heart and soul. But when I did sense that, I kind of doing what I saw you do, is I want to breathe into it to give it space and, fill it with oxygen. And kind of, it was because I saw you do that too, but I have just a natural tendency to want to do that same thing too, to put air into that feeling.
Right. So in contrast with the heaviness and the constriction of the head, the one down here, this feeling down here feels more like a knife or a stabbing or a cutting in your heart area. And when you were reflecting on that, you were feeling this desire to breathe into it and open up. And you saw me do it, and it, you're kind of like, I want to do that as well, and maybe bring some oxygen to it.
Yeah, it's kind of like, let's really stretch. It's like I'm getting all stretched, getting all constricted, and sort of want to counteract it just by being aware of it, to start, kind of moving my body and stretch it out, which it creates, I still feel a little bit of it, but it kind of covers it with sort of more fresh, alive energy.
So you're feeling this wanting to almost move and stretch, and kind of drawing attention to it makes you kind of want to, I'm noticing it more even, and you're wanting to move around a little bit, and it's still there, but there's a little bit of other elements to that.
And then as you were speaking, I could feel sort of a heaviness come back, like, oh my God, I got this to do, this to do. It's like a whole to-do list kind of coming into my awareness. Yeah.
Right. So then as we were talking about that and the moving and the stretching, all of a sudden it went back up to the head, and you were reminded of the to-do list and everything that you had to do. So then it kind of moved back up into that space.
Yeah. And it's fun talking to you. I really appreciate you kind of reaching out and, I just would like to get in contact with a lot more people like yourself who are, really can see the potential of this empathic way of being and have the creativity to, kind of address it.
Right. So the timer went off. So that last one was, you're feeling a lot of gratitude and just kind of coming in contact with me and people who are enthusiastic and they see the value in it. And just some appreciation about this process and showing interest and value in that. It's
a energizing, I would say.
Right. So there's an energizing aspect to it.
Yeah, I feel heard.
Awesome. All right. All right. So timer. I mean, I'm feeling a lot of gratitude in the sense that this is kind of what I was hoping to do is a little private empathy circle with you. It's almost like there's almost like a sense of honor in that, of just kind of like, I've been following you for a long time, and it feels good to just sit here and do the process with you.
So it just feels good that since you've been following my work online and just to actually do the process with me feels like sort of an honor, and sort of kind of what you were hoping would happen too.
Yeah, and there was some anxiety coming into the conversation that would come and go since I reached out to you. There was this like push and pull of anxiety around some excitement and then some anxiety, and they were kind of playing off each other.
Yeah, there was kind of a dynamic push and pull of feeling anxiety about doing the circle and sort of another feeling. I can't remember what that was, but it was a push and pull between those two.
Yeah, like excitement and anxiety of like doing something new is exciting, but it's also kind of like, oh, it's something new. It's kind of overwhelming, but it's also exciting. So those two kind of seem to play off each other.
So it's something new, kind of anxiety about that, but it's also the excitement. So you feeling both at the same time.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder about, how closely they're related, right? Like when you feel excited, there's kind of like this, I wouldn't say like, there's like some energy in the solar plexus. It doesn't feel as dark, but it feels like there's also energy there.
Mm-hmm. So feeling excitement it has a darkness to it, but excitement has like an energy to it, and just noticing that energy.
Yeah, it's like a similar energy, but with the anxiety, there's like a slight tinge of darkness to it. So it's like similar amount of energy, but just with a different like tint on it.
So anxiety actually has energy to it, but it has a darkness, a tint of darkness to it versus excitement, which maybe doesn't have that darkness to it.
Mm-hmm. And now I'm just wanting to like take a breath. Kind of like what you were saying of just slow things down a little bit and just maybe try and let go of a little bit of that energy.
Yeah, I just want to take a deep breath and let go of some of that anxiety or that energy, and kind of fill it with some oxygen, air, relaxation, space.
Yeah, it's funny, as I'm hearing the reflection back, there was like an easing, but then it was like a vacuum, like you were saying, of all of a sudden it back up to the head. There was back up to the head of like, oh, what are people going to think about when they see this and hear this? And, oh yeah, I'm doing this podcast. And do I do silence? Like, is that good? Is that bad?
Yeah. So there's like some concern, some anxiety came up. Like you started maybe feeling self-conscious. What are other people going to be thinking about it? Is this good or bad? Is it okay for me to have some silence and just quiet in this discussion?
Yeah, but there's a desire to just slow down, and I think sometimes that helps with my anxieties and fears and stuff, is just slowing down. So yeah, that slowing down seems to kind of counterbalance the anxiety and fears a little bit. Yeah,
the just being able to slow down is a counter to that feeling of anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel heard. Thank you.
Okay. I feel I love this topic. I think I really want to delve into it more. I should really put it aside some time to do this on a regular basis, because I think just constantly facing those fears and anxiety, I feel much more relaxed.
So you're wanting to actually maybe set aside some time to actually explore this topic even more, because you find there's a lot here, and even as you're talking about it, you're kind of relaxing a little bit and just enjoying exploring this topic.
Yeah, the feelings, it feels spacious. The anxiety has moved kind of farther away, from my core. But as I say that, I still feel, it kind of in my core. But there's a spaciousness around it too.
So there's a spaciousness to this feeling of kind of some anxiety or just that feeling that you were talking about before. And it's still there, but now there's a bit of space to it as well.
Yeah. And the image of, is it Saruman, the in Lord of the Rings, the eye,
right.
The eye, it's kind of like at the core is sort of this anxiety, kind of like, and for some reason that image just kind of came up, that slice in the middle.
So a lot of imagery is coming to you right now, and the eye of Saruman, did you say?
Mm-hmm.
And that, and kind of being at the core, and there's like a slicing.
Yeah, that does seem to be the breath helps too, just to keep breathing into those. It's like just to have a desire to breathe more, to because of I can feel the constriction moving forward, pushing. Yeah, it's concern. I gotta work hard.
So there's this attention returning back to the breath, and this desire to kind of breathe into it and breathe open, and noticing that really has a big effect on that feeling, and that all the to do and all that kind of stuff, and the breath really has an impact on that.
And also in terms of you asking for it to do like an interview, and usually I try to make myself really open and accessible, but I've been getting so kind of busy that I'm trying to, kind of be, just kind of watch where I spend my time. And so I felt a little concerned. I didn't know what to expect because you didn't have, podcasts and so forth to see. I had no idea what you looked like, what you're doing. And so I had a little bit of concern about, putting this time aside.
So there was a little bit of concern in agreeing to do this podcast with me because you've been very busy and had a lot on your plate lately. So you're a bit weary of how you spend your time and being intentional about that. So you're a little concerned about what this was going to be like and if it was going to be maybe kind of worth the time or
right.
To put the attention on.
And I do try to be accessible, just try to take up everybody, just for, and so I did have concerns. So I'm really glad I did. I'm really enjoying, and also that you're interested in doing an empathy circle to model it too. And yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Right. So despite the initial concern, you're glad that you did end up agreeing to it, and you're glad that I was willing to participate in an empathy circle to model it.
Yeah, and it feels good to share those concerns too, just to have them out, just let them, so there's something about sharing those concerns that, okay, it's out there, it's not floating around in my head. I feel sort of a release from that.
So in being able to share the concerns about, well, you didn't really have a lot of information about what this was going to be like or what to expect, and but being able to share that and kind of get it out and not be stuck inside you is actually, there's a good feeling. It feels a bit good.
Yeah. And more concern is got to get sort of a ball rolling with the empathy circle. There's just a lot, I kind of see it as a metaphorical ball or snowball, right? Got to get it, and it's in its very early developmental stages. And I'm kind of looking at how to get that ball rolling and having some anxiety concerns about getting that ball rolling. Just have some anxiety about that concerns.
So that was time. So you're noticing like you're kind of thinking of it like a ball, and you have to get the ball rolling and some momentum to it, like a snowball. And there was concerns about, like, it takes time for it to kind of start to form and to build momentum, and some concerns about that process.
Yeah, feel heard. Thanks.
All right. So yeah, I'm noticing right now in this moment, like a lot is alive for me. Based on everything that we've said, I'm kind of like at a crossroads of like, oh, which road do I go down here? There's so much to it.
Yeah, just seeing a lot of options, a lot of ideas, feelings coming up, and which path do you take to share?
Yeah, so I'm seeing kind of one on my left that's I just want to acknowledge and show some appreciation for willing to do this. I know there wasn't a lot of information sent to you, but there's a lot of appreciation for willing to take a chance and to do this with me.
Yeah, really feeling a real sense of appreciation for me. Taking a chance and doing this with you.
Yeah, and then there's a lot of aliveness around this idea of the ball, this snowball kind of thing. And for me, this idea of the ball, so when I think of the empathy circle with 4 people, I'm seeing this ball and I see how people feed into it, like threads into this, like it's almost becoming a ball of yarn now.
Mm-hmm. So this whole notion of metaphor of a ball sort of growing, and how the empathy circle is this energetic maybe ball that everybody feeds into, and it just keeps growing.
Yeah, like there's like threads attached to each person. And I think once you get over that initial anxiety and the ball starts to form and you start to feed it, it like becomes alive. There's like an aliveness to it.
So it's like everyone has a thread that they're putting into the ball, and the ball just kind of comes alive, and so it has this aliveness to it that everyone is feeding.
Yeah, and I'm wondering with the concerns, anxieties, and fears, like does that get in the way of those threads? Does it like interrupt that process? And I think in a normal conversation or normal interactions, it does. But I think what this process does is it allows those to become part of the ball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, normally in normal conversations, the fears and anxieties can maybe block the forming of that ball. But with the empathy circle, it actually, those fears become part of the ball and part of that dynamic that's growing.
Yeah, and I think there's oftentimes I wish I could speak to it more, but wondering about in certain situations or like the workplace or certain things where like maybe it's not okay to speak to those things. And then that's another anxiety. It's almost like anxiety or fear about having fear and anxieties.
Mm-hmm. So in your work environment, you like to share some fears and anxieties, but you have fear and anxiety about sharing those. So it's fear and anxiety on top of fear and anxiety.
Yeah, so it's like a little like nested Russian doll where there's like fears inside fears inside fears inside fears.
So it's like this fear Russian dolls where they're kind of nested inside of each other. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the benefits of the empathy circle and being able to share the fears and anxiety is it starts to open up the other aspects of fear and anxiety in your life. It's almost like they're attached by a thread themselves, and as you start to unravel it, it starts to open up other aspects of anxieties and fears.
Yeah, so if you take one fear and anxiety away, it is connected to another one. You take that and it's connected to another one. They're connected to each other, and the empathy circle helps you to sort of address that or speak to it or take it apart.
Yeah, no, I feel heard. Thank you.
Yeah, I like that metaphor of the Russian doll because I see that as well. I've done sort of facing my fears in a dance, freestyle dance. And it was exactly that. Every time I took off one of the Russian dolls, within a few seconds, there was a whole nother one under it. It was like layer after layer after layer of different fears and anxiety. But each one that I took, and it was like, oh, I don't want to take the doll away because I have to face another one. So there was like resistance to doing it. It's like something pulling me, like, don't do this. It's too painful.
Right. So you're noticing the Russian doll metaphor and you like it. And you noticed in like kind of freeform dancing, you'd kind of shed one of the Russian dolls and all of a sudden there'd be another one and then there'd be another one. And there's something in you kind of being like, no, don't go here or don't keep doing it because it's painful. It's tough to just keep meeting these Russian dolls over and over again.
But the thing is when I did it at the end of like an hour and a half, I felt so at peace that it was like I just had this really great peace that I could just feel in my body, just sort of a relaxation of having done it. It was just very peaceful.
So despite this feeling of resistance, the persistence through it and kind of facing these fears and moving through them left you at the end with a feeling of like peace and calmness.
Deep peace. It was like a very deep peace. And then my question is okay, you got peace, but how do I have forward motion then in terms of a constructive or creative forward motion? And I didn't have a clear... I imagine you keep doing it, that something will emerge as a forward motion of what do I put my energies towards besides taking apart fear? How do I create something constructive?
So at the bottom of this piece, and you added a deep piece. It wasn't just a piece. There was like a depth to it, a deepening to it. And you sat with that, but you weren't sure about this forward movement. So like like the piece sits there, and then it's like, well, where does the forward momentum come from, and will it come eventually, or and you're noticing the contrast between those two.
Yeah, it's sort of, I kind of have a yearning for creativity, right? There is a creativity of undoing the fears and anxieties, but a positive forward creativity is sort of, I think I'm looking for something like that. And that's part of the ball, with the empathy center, creating a positive forward rolling ball that, kind of goes out into society and sort of has that societal transformation of just creating a more empathic society.
So out of this deep piece, there's maybe, I think what you're saying is like the possibility of creativity, or
a yearning for it.
A yearning, right?
I have this yearning. I would like to have a positive, peaceful, forward, creative motion come out of that.
Right. So out of that deep piece was a yearning that came for creativity and forward movement and a lot of openness. And
yeah, I think it'll come from the relationships too. It's not just me having it myself, but in relation to others, can we have this, forward constructive feeling?
So it's not just within yourself. It's this yearning for this forward momentum and this opening and this kind of peacefulness, but to bring in other people into that process.
Yeah, I feel heard in time.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I see, yeah, lots of things are coming to mind for me. So again, I feel like I'm wondering which one. I guess I want to speak to deep peace first. There's been, a few times in my life, or like quite a few times, where like you feel that deep peace, and it's different than just like a shallow peace, like contentment. And then maybe contentment's part of that deep peace, but there's like a deeper level of it, and then like a surface level of it, like, I'm doing all right. But then there's like a yes, like things are, yeah.
Yes, just a lot of things to speak to, but the one about the deep peace and comparing that to sort of a more contentment, more of a superficial peace, and it's a real deep.
Yeah, and sometimes, when I'm wondering like what to do or what action to take or where to go or what to do about something, I often try and reconnect with that and try and find that again, and almost like that centeredness. I feel like my wisest action comes out of that deep peace, right? If I can get that.
So when you kind of want to go forward with things, you do try to connect back to that deep peace, because when you're coming from that deep peace, you're sort of going more in the right direction, making maybe the good decisions, or the actions are really in a positive, good direction.
Yeah, and then I'm wondering about like action out of fear, right? In contrast with that kind of peace, and kind of like there's a stillness to action, and kind of like that like the Wu Wei, right? Like action and non-action. There's this kind of collapsing of polarity in peace. But out of fear, there's like a grasping, and there's like a trying, and there's an effort, and there's like, like a grinding to it.
Yeah, so you're seeing there's a certain quality to the, taking action out of peace, and there's a different sort of a quality to action coming out of fear. From out of fear, there's a grasping, a clawing, a grinding, sort of a feeling to it.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about like the trying to avoid the fear versus the facing the fear. And trying to avoid the fear, like the image that comes to mind is like a mouse running away from something, right? It's like, oh, it's skirting away and doing this and kind of running around, but in opposition with the kind of facing the fear. This is
So
like
just
a
kind of getting
chaos.
this, yes, kind of getting a feeling for the difference between facing and avoiding fear. The avoiding is kind of a scurrying, kind of a chaotic sort of a feeling compared to the facing of the fear.
Yeah, and the facing is hard. Um, and actually, that's kind of what I'm doing in this podcast, which is coming out in this conversation, right? Part of the podcast is putting myself out there and facing that fear of like criticism or, being viewed in a certain way, or what are you going to say? Or I overthink conversations. That's one of my anxieties, is like overthinking. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Oh, I said this and should have said. So thinking about that being recorded and shared with other people sometimes makes my anxiety go, oh my God, what am I doing? What am I doing? But then there's this like, no, this is part of facing that fear. So this process for me is part of that facing the fear.
So doing these podcasts is actually sort of facing your fears, even though you might have all kinds of anxieties about how you'll be seen and judged, and what you're going to say, and if you should have said it or not. So just doing it is facing those fears.
Yeah, I feel heard. Yeah.
Okay, speak back then. I really do want to do that. I think it's just really helpful to face those fears. The workshop we're doing on the 28th is going to be on the 23rd at the center, is going to be on sort of combining the mindfulness and the empathy circles and facing fears. So I think it could really be something, if it was well developed as a process, that could be something that could be really replicated. Because I just had that experience in the dance, how powerful and then doing it with others, so you're not alone. Because a lot of times facing fears alone is sort of even scarier than facing it with others.
Right. Okay. So there's this, you're thinking about this, bringing in this kind of facing fears and mindfulness, these two elements, and bringing it into the workshop that you're planning in September with the Building a Center of Empathy. And you also brought in then this element of facing your fears alone versus facing your fears with others, and how they feel differently.
And I do think that facing fears together is, you have the social connection part of it, right? It's like, and that social connection has a warmth to it, a multi-dimensional part. So, I think it would help with facing fears. And I also learn a lot just by listening to how you're facing your fears, and so you learn from the others too. So it's a very it's multidimensional. To how to move through those feelings.
Right. So the facing the fears together has a social aspect where there's like a warmth and connectedness to it, and maybe a strength to it, and then versus facing it alone. And you find just in listening and hearing other people's fears and how people are dealing with it, it can be insightful, and you can learn a lot just from sharing and facing fears together.
Yeah, so it's just been the nuts and bolts of how to set aside, a couple hours every week to do that. But I just keep, seeing how it could be something that could sort of catch on. It's like a process that could, so-called go viral. People say, "Oh, this is really good," because the fear is sort of saying there's something wrong here that needs to be addressed. Right? It's sort of a feeling that something is going on here, and I want this to be addressed. And, so addressing it in an empathy circle on a regular basis, systematically, I think could be, I can see how it could be really beneficial. Yeah. Helpful.
So that fear, almost like the feeling of fear, is the feeling that there's something wrong and there's something that needs to be addressed here. And you see the empathy circle as a possible way to approach these fears and these elements in a systematic way, in a way of kind of moving through them with other people, and in a way that, again, the systematic part, in a way that's structured.
And have other tools too for other sort of practices like that, focusing, just the felt experience of it. I think that does help the empathy circle go deeper, is, if I can address the felt experience that's in my body. And it's kind of easier to tap into the fear as a felt experience because it's like kind of in your face.
Right. So it's easier to tap into the fear because it's right there. It's right in your face. But adding these other tools also into it, as well as the empathy circle, can just build this really good toolbox or tool belt of tools to kind of address fear and anxieties and concerns.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's... having a little concern about the time. So we've gone about almost an hour and 40 minutes. So yeah. I'm feeling like I have a fear of, I haven't been doing my exercises like I usually do. I usually go because of all the driving back and forth, and I should get out there and do some exercise.
So I think on that note, if you feel heard, we can kind of close the empathy circle. It did go a little bit longer, but I was enjoying it. So I just kind of...
I really enjoyed it too. I'm so glad we did the empathy circle part of it too. I think it's a lot of fun, really enjoying connecting with you, and hope you come to some of the visioning circles to, share your ideas on Saturdays too.
Yeah, I'd love to. I will definitely keep an eye out for one that aligns with my schedule. And I really appreciate you willing to sit down with me and, again, take a chance on the unknown there, face that concern or face that fear of the unknown, of sitting down with me and giving me your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Okay, great, Nick. Good,
is there any last message that you want to say or anything?
Just stay in contact, stay in touch. I love, bring more people into the circles. You have some good ideas for empathy circles. I'm glad to kind of help get those started. We have a whole community of people. If you said, hey, I'm going to do a fear empathy circle, you can post it on our, calendar. We'll promote it, kind of help move any kind of projects like that forward. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I'll post your links below so people can kind of click on it and learn more about you. And again, Edwin, thank you so much for joining me, and I really appreciate it.
Bye, Nick.
Thanks, Edwin. Bye.